This looks very not a USB. Do you have that on? I do have one, but I've never tried that. What's yours? HDMI?
Yes.
Do you have any HDMI?
We have that there.
So what can I? The HDMI cable. This should be fine.
I was watching this.
Hope it will work. So, and now, yes. Martin se přepíná potom tady z toho noťasu. Ještě noťas? Čuplík je to dáme tady taky. Yes, sure. What to do? No, this one. Come on.
You just shut down 2 screens. I don't know why and how.
Me? No.
Yeah, you have it.
I know, but it's just I'm trying to figure out why it doesn't work.
Too much technology.
Too much. I don't. A prostě nefunguje to, protože zapal jsem HDMIčko. Teď bych měl prostě přepnout normálně, jako na čas. No, že by tam vlastně měl být ten...
Co to chceš?
Zapnout rodovou počítač, no. Aby byl vidět. Ale jako tady ten.
Jo.
Já potřebuji...
To je HDMIčko.
HDMI.
No tak tohle nebo tohle, ne?
No, ale to dělám.
No, tak to uděláme.
Why it won't work? Some magic.
Tohle bylo zaplý v počítači?
Ne, to tam jenom vyselo.
A ty nechceš tam na počítač vůbec?
No, připuštěně, on se zabírá, že jo, tou kamerou.
Jo, aha.
Takže puštěný jako by měl být, ale neměl se promítat, že to vlastně to není třeba.
Yeah, I'm worried. Yeah, we were just like in the theory out of hand, like over the audience. Yeah, you can just sit here.
Jo.
Vlastně,
Hele, budeme udělat to, že to HDMIčko dáme sem. Jo, to asi zkusit. To je ono, tenhle. Takže tak to vypne tady.
we finished in 3 in the morning, so I hope I'm coming.
The same place, or you went down to the town?
We were in the station. Yeah, we went downtown. I have this design there, so it's perfect. Oh. Okay. And
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
we're there.
Okay. Great. Thank you. What do we have only 2 things that for?
Again, human wins over technology.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How's it going?
Oh,
Hi, Jordan.
I heard it was a long night yesterday.
Another conference Monday, right?
If I were not presenting this morning, I would have been tempted. But
Well, I was to tempt you one of the coming
the
days.
coming days, maybe tonight or Thursday. Tomorrow I'm going to a classical concert with some friends in Prague.
Ah, how nice.
So tomorrow I'm busy, but tonight or Thursday? Maybe Thursday.
You have our
Around the
attention.
period.
Sure.
Sorry,
is-
sorry.
No.
I'm
Michael.
off.
Is there anything I should know? Price was right.
It's a very, very, very tough question. I don't know where to start. No, I think it's working. Yeah, that nice and funny?
Yes, sorry.
One, two, or sometimes
It turns off. There. So I lose contact. Hello, hello. Back now. Hello.
That's all was ready. Is it? So should we use this one? Does it work?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. All right.
There is on and off. Yeah. Now it's on. Yeah, and it's on this. Possible.
Because I can
Put in
all right. Let's work with this. It's good. Give me. Is there any particular way you'd like me to introduce you?
Whatever you want.
And
Personal is best.
Personal is
Not all big occasions.
okay. And then Article 57.
Exactly.
And would you like me to put you in any way so I know we have 1 hour in total? Do I need to tell you at some point how many time is left?
I think I can manage. I'll tell the audience also. I'll make a break, question break, about 45 minutes.
All right.
For the first part. And then people can very quickly stretch the legs. And then for the second, because 2 hours on stop is too long.
You're
So I can divide it into two parts.
Excellent idea. Yeah. Yes, I'm going to do that.
I'm ready.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a nice first day. It's my great pleasure to introduce someone who you already know. Jordan Zlatev is Professor of Cognitive Semiotics at University of Lund at the Center of Linguistics and Literature. If you are studying semiotics, which you probably are, you probably read some of Jordan's work. If you are studying cognitive semiotics in Aachen, it's a fact that you read some of Jordan's work. And I think Jordan is one of the established semiotic scholars to whom those of us interested in semiotics owe the fact that semiotics remains institutionalized. Semiotics, you may know, has this problem. Where do you study it? Where do you get a job as a semiotician? Well, thanks to Jordan, among others, of course, semiotics is properly institutionalized at the University of Lund, and that's no small thing. Without further ado, Jordan, please.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Right. So it's a long talk, and I just found out that I've broken it up in 2 parts. So there'll be time to stretch one's legs at around 10 o'clock or before that, along with the first question session. About my name, the translation, Jordan is perfect. Jordan works well. Jordan, if you're Bulgarian. That's what happens with many of us, multicultural persons. We're used to our names being pronounced in various ways. Technically, it's not a correction, but again, it's a kind of mixed identities. I'm a full professor in general linguistics since 2012. I tried to make it a professor in cognitive semiotics, but they wouldn't allow me. Because that would institutionalize cognitive semiotics, they would have to have a new professor after I retire, and I haven't managed to do that yet. So it's semi-institutionalized, you could say. And cognitive semiotics, I'll explain soon, it's really as a joint venture between semiotics, linguistics, and cognitive science. So the term cognitive semiotics is defined slightly differently by Bologna and Aachen and Aarhus and Lublin and Toronto, but okay, that's fine. It's why? Well, the title, I'll explain why this image. And the simplest answer is because the software proposed it. You know, they're getting so smart, these versions. So you click a title and then they have a design suggestions, the latest versions of PowerPoint. So they came up with this. What? It's kind of a metaphor, right? Maybe even a meta-metaphor for visual metaphor or pictorial metaphor. Why? Because the artist's motto is so versatile, it's so abstract. It can mean many different things. So it's a metaphor. Why pictorial rather than visual? Well, one thing is that, you know, even the title of the summer school and, you know, journals and conferences are called visual metaphor. I would suggest that we're using the term visual as a kind of metonymy, that is something that is closely related to something else. And vision is a sensory modality which we use for, among other things, interpreting images. But we also use it for reading, writing most of the time, for looking at gestures. So it's a sensory modality, not really a science system. Well, pictures are a kind of science system alongside language, music, gestures, and so on. Another terminological thing that we could discuss if necessary. Anyway, and I think that my close colleague who unfortunately passed away recently, who I would like to commemorate, many of you know him personally, many of the rest of you have read about him, Göran Sonesson, who was the professor in semiotics, the only professor in semiotics in Sweden, up to date, passed away on March 17th this year. Sadly, he was one of the founder of the International Association for Visual Semiotics, and he would very much agree with what I just said a moment ago. We're using the term visual in kind of an extended sense. So he was also Vice Secretary General of the International Association for 1 or 2 periods. He established the Nordic Association for Semiotic Studies, and as well helped establish the International Association of Cognitive Semiotics, which I said, at least in Lund, began as a kind of a merger between Göran and his closest colleagues and students, and my closest colleagues and students some 10 years ago, alongside 15 years ago. It started with first projects, and then it became somewhat institutionalized. So yes, it's I'm still spinning on Alin's introduction. It's an ongoing battle. So yes, thank you, Göran, and passing on the torch. So this is the outline for today: cognitive semiotics and the motivation and sedimentation model. Defining metaphor, and well, we cannot avoid Aristotle for most things, and metaphor being one of them. So we'll have to quote again his famous definition, which is arguably too broad. Well, too broad and too narrow. Too narrow because we mostly talk about language, but too broad because it also considers things like generalization and specialization. So, and up to the break, the mini break, first, I was not planning for a longer talk. I was just planning for a shorter, and maybe would have gotten maybe just 4, 5, and 6. But now that I have more time, I put in some other work, some previous work on applying the motivation and sedimentation model to metaphor analysis, mostly in language therapy discourse. And then from then on, we move on to kind of revising the previous definition alongside metonymy. It was Di Wu, who sitting there at the back, who was a visiting student from China, who came a year ago to Lund and said, "How about metonymy, Jordan? It's the little sister of metaphor, and it's Jacobson and others have taught us that they're interdefined, and we'll be actually using Jacobson's definition of metaphor and metonymy and extending and see how they relate and interact in pictorial or verbal pictorial metaphors, focusing on perhaps arguably the most relevant topic of the day, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine a year and a half, a year ago, and using political cartoons as examples. Okay, so what is cognitive semiotics? Many of you know there is a journal. Well, that's a step in institutionalization. You start by having a journal, you have a conference series, and we have this book came out from the 2014 conference in cognitive semiotics at Lund University, Meaning, Mind, Communication, Inspirations, Cognitive Semiotics, with myself, Göran Sonesson, and Piotr Konderek as editors. So here's a simple definition. It's a discipline, right? We have a PhD program in cognitive semiotics, so it has to be its own discipline. So it's not a kind of semiotics. I know this, the modifier construction, head will tend to put it alongside with cultural semiotics or biosemiotics or so on, but it's cognitive. But that's kind of unfortunate. Do you want to oppose the others, or is cognitive as opposed to social, or cognitive as opposed to emotion? So well, it's a term that actually emerged 15 years ago when we Jordan and I and a few others had a lot of funding for a center. So what are we going to call it? We can cognitive semiotics, and then you have to fill this signifier with cognitive when it goes. So in practice, it is developed as this interaction, between semiotics, linguistics, and cognitive science. At least in London, and for many of us, influenced by the phenomenology of Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, and some others. So why not just semiotics? Well, this is my perfect. As I said, I started as a linguist. I came to semiotics some 20 years ago, looking for a broader framework to analyze other kinds of meaning than those in language. So it's a long tradition. As Joran likes to point out in his pictorial concepts of one of the classics, it's hard to read from beginning to end, but it's good to have as a resource. It's 500 pages, and you can read it from various sides and so on. So he likes to emphasize it didn't start with purrs or semiotics started over 2,000 years ago. Greeks and the Stoics and passed through various stages, etc. And that's a strength. It concerns not just language, but also other semiotic systems. And it's interdisciplinary, but I think we agree, at least until recently, and for most of the cases associated with the humanities and the arts. If you want to work with people in natural or social science, they may be a bit skeptical. Maybe with biology is an exception. So that's on the negative side. There's been a tendency to focus not on specific artworks, to being very so-called ideographical, or else to make grand models of the universe. And I'm a bit guilty of that myself. If some of you have read about my semiotic hierarchy from life to language, that's also kind of falls into this. But again, I try to balance it out with the second. Classical semiotics, on my reading, paid relatively little attention to scientific rigor, to definitions, to operationalizations, to careful empirical studies and quantification, inferential statistics. Not that every semiotic study has to have that, but if you don't do that at least part of the time, people from the natural sciences will be skeptical. And this is how much to say, oh, this is just scientism. Well, some of it is scientism, but you also have to learn the game of the scientists if you're going to interact with them. And again, what I discovered 20 years ago, that it was coming from linguistics, which is very much divided into various schools. Semiotics was no less divided. So language, well, yes, it does, or linguistics, it does focus on what is most obviously unique for us. There are other things that are unique for us as a species, but language is. And I wouldn't just say just verbal language, as people like to say in semiotics. I would say language, because gestures, pictures are not language. They're different kinds of semiotic systems. Language can be spoken, written, and signed. But I won't be defining language right now. But the type of grammar it has distinguishes it from gestures, pictures, and so on. What I think is good to inherit from linguistics, even though not all linguists acknowledge it, is kind of a triangulation, methodological triangulation. Linguists, whether they like it or not, start with their own intuitions. And not just intuition in a fuzzy way, but is this correct or not correct? Is this appropriate or not appropriate? Is it starred or not, etc.? So you work systematically with your own intuitions as a linguist. Well, that's not enough. You also have to go and look at corpora. If you look at interaction studies, and you very often have to do experiments in neuroscience and so on. But you have these three that you triangulate with it. So some of our ideas of methodological, what we're calling phenomenological triangulation, came from this. So it's also linguistics are moving away from the Chomskyan era, where it was a self-contained system, and language was viewed as self-contained. So cognitive functional linguistics, for George Lakoff as a representative, shows this new trend. On the negative side, linguists have also struggled with questions where do the borders between language and non-language go? In the case of sign languages, you had this, and there was a political issue, as you probably know. If you want to define language arbitrariness as a necessary feature of language, which I think is mistaken, then all iconicity in sign language turns out to be problematic. Actually, extending, going to the study of gestures with Adam Camden and others, broaden the field of linguistics. But it's not just linguistics. That's my problem when I go, let's say, to conferences in cognitive linguistics. It all becomes, again, language. Even when they analyze memes, the pictorial elements of memes. And also interface problems with where's the border with semantic knowledge and world knowledge, and again, the different schools. Andy Clark is a representative of the new kind of cognitive science, the enactive, embodied, extended, ecological, 4E, right? Good. I mean, it started much earlier. When I studied cognitive science in Stockholm 30 years ago, I studied Gardner. That was called the Mind's New Science. And at that time it was new. But now it's pretty old hat. It's quite computationalist and representationalist and so on. But again, and it's also quite pluralistic in terms of methodologies. On the negative side, again, it has, again, for the most part, dealing, even the most 4E, whenever you mention issues like subjectivity, axiology or values, intersubjectivity, normativity, people get a bit queasy. Even the consciousness, the C word. So, and it's polarized in issues of representation, intention, innateness, biased in favor of physicalism. So, even because it started with computationalists and physicalists, so the mind is the computer and the mind is the brain. But people nowadays mostly accept that mind is the computer as a metaphor. But not many can see why the mind is the brain is a metaphor as well, or a narrowing, at least, or specialization. So, voila, cognitive semiotics to the rescue, to help us take the best and leave the rest. Tongue in cheek, right? At least this is the way we present it. Try to make a synthesis in which we won't include everything from the fields of these, but and again, there are many ways to play the game. You can take some ideas, others. Some can be more Peircean, other can be more Saussurean, something more phenomenological, some more enactive, etc. But you use the trick is or the criterion is to use productive insights, methods, concepts, theories from 2 or 3 of these. And this is our library in Lund. It's not as old as it looks here. It's pretty nice. So we're having the conference again 10 years after the 2014, and you're all welcome to participate or submit abstracts. We plan to announce the first call for papers on August 15th. Let's see if we manage 1 year exactly before. We have some preliminary speakers who have agreed already. We're still waiting for some others, and the theme is crises of meaning. To look at the various kinds of crises, epistemological crises, existential, social, ecological, with the help of cognitive semiotics, and perhaps even find some antidotes. Okay, so let's start getting more specific. Embodiment in culture. Here we see Jackson Pollock on one hand, and tea ceremony in the Japanese kind as illustrations of 2 sides of the dialectics, being very spontaneous in your expression, on the other hand, very sediment, very structured, very institutionalized. So one could be seen as an aspect of embodiment, the other of culture. So some form of interaction of this, I think, is something many of us are concerned with. There are different terms for a different approach. It's been something that has been my preoccupation for 30 years when I embarked on my PhD project, this was my thesis in '97, published as a book, never became other books. This is why I have a really homemade first page. I'm kind of proud of it. That's the technology of 1996. And I even drew my own yin and yang. And, I knew how to do circles and coloring and so on. And again, you can see the dynamicity and the dialectics of the body and culture I put the square that nobody really got. You know, it's that's what constrains it. That makes it a framework. It's not completely artistic. You need a framework, so you have a square element to it. It's also a little bit of parable on the Saussurian sign graph. You know, the strict one that is divided between significance. Nobody got that analogy also. So we break up the significance distinction, something more dynamic. Now, some inspirations before, and so many of the theories, models we've come across over that time have been some variations on this theme of embodiment culture interactions. But here are some inspirations that I, over the years, I learned after the thesis. Eugenio Cousceliu, one of the greatest linguists of the 20th century, that does not get the credit that he deserves. So if you haven't read it, it's a very short paper in 1985, Language Competence, What is it really? And it's mostly published in Spanish, Italian, German, etc. Only about 10 of his 200 papers are in English. I think that's one of the reasons that he's not as popular as he should in the English-speaking world. But he had this, you know, famous matrix. As you can see, he has the Aristotelian, I think, von Humboldt terms of energia, activity, and ergon, product. And he very wisely put dynamis as a kind of practical knowledge in the middle. So, you know, you have it, and then also there's kind of a constant interaction between the activity, the parole, or something more, you know, creative, or, I mean, that's why he used energia rather than parole, that motivates both knowledge and structures, and they, on the other hand, interact with or constrain or the activity. He also had these 3 levels that have been very useful when you think about language or any other science system, either on the universal level. That means something that is not specific to individual cultures. Language as such, pictures as such, music as such. You can think about it on the historical as it manifests in particular languages or traditions or musical styles. You can think about individual, the most situated, specific, like what we're doing here and now. So this has been a major inspiration for us. Another is another model that is called the entrenchment and conventionalization model, authored by Schmidt, Jürgen Schmidt. A linguist that some of you may have heard of. And when I met him at one cognitive linguistics conference, I was not surprised to hear that he had studied Cousceliu a lot. And you can see he has 3 cycles. He has here this is the actual usage events. And this is which kind of drives this Tingali machine. And this is the social, the super individual part, conventionalization and feedback loop with usualization. You cannot read it, usualization and conventionalization, and diffusion. And then this is the individual part with entrenchment and schematization. So notice he has kind of an energia like part, and then he has a more of a dynamis part, and he has more of a ergon part from before, right? The more social, the more individual, and they meet in actual interaction. And phenomenology. For me, the strongest influence. I don't read well French, so it's mostly through English that I read Merleau-Ponty. Here's a good quotation I thought especially appropriate for this summer school. Visual contents are taken up, utilized, and sublimated to the level of thought by a symbolical power which transcends them, but it is on the basis of sight that this power can be constituted. The relationship between matter and form is called in the phonological terminology relation of fundierung. The symbolic function rests on the visual as on a ground. And the only thing I would say that he's also being metonymic here. He's talking about the visual, but he actually means perception. So it's kind of part for whole metonymy. So he means, for most of us, our dominant sense, but he means also touch and smell and so on. This should be, I guess, complemented with thought is no internal thing and does not exist independently of the world, but also of words. So thought is not something purely internal. It is embodied, enacted, extended, and so on. So certainly one of the figures I think can help a predecessor for many ideas in modern cognitive science, in cognitive semiotics. So what is the model? After a lot of, it has 3 levels: the situated, the sedimented, the embodied. You may remember Coucherius, they kind of flipped upside down and a bit reinterpreted. The embodied is not just about language, it's pre-linguistic and also even pre-signative. It's universal or pan-human. In the sense that all people have potentially the same potential for sensory knowledge, body schemas and meta schemas, and body interaction analogy making that they use in particular context, situated context. These become very quickly sedimented down into a sedimented layer that co-motivates practice at the same time. So you have a double motivation from the embodied and from the cultural. Interactions between the embodied and the cultural. You have also a kind of a horizontal ongoing interaction. Remember the previous schemes between structure, or ergon, and energia, more process. One process is sedimenting into relatively stable structures that co-motivate others. Okay, let's have some, I like a lot of everyday examples, especially when you teach undergraduate courses. You're taught to use a lot of examples, so we do. So this is what situated level is. I think more outside or in the pub than here, but we also have a form of situated level interaction, more constrained by sedimented norms of what a lecturer does and what participants do. But yeah, it involves spontaneous language and other science system use and contextualized polysemiotic. We prefer to use the term polysemiotic than multimodal, precisely for the reason I said at the beginning. Polysemiotic is a combination of different science systems. Multimodality is a combination of different sensory modalities. And they are, in principle, orthogonal. Speech could be performed without gestures and without pictures, and still multimodal in most cases in face-to-face interaction because you both hear and see me. So the sedimented includes social and linguistic norms and other kinds of norms, as this illustrates. Socially shared knowledge, schemas, scripts, writing systems, symbolic notions. And the embodied level, as said before, consists of pan-human experiential processes and structures like cross-modal perception, categorization, empathy, also known as mentalizing. It's a topic in itself, what kinds of empathy there is and which are uniquely human and which other animals are capable. We talked about that a bit yesterday. Analogy making. So this, what should fill in the blank? Star. And the star of this kind. And it's just like the first case. It's changing color rather than changing shape or changing size. And psychologists love these kind of nonverbal tests for. And the thing is, you don't have to perform them on the basis of language. You can see it. So Gilbert and I use this approach to talk about language norms. What are they? What kind exists? Norms of correctness, norms of appropriateness, norms of truth, etc. Verbal metaphors. Simon de Wilder looked at corpus data to look at metaphors of the divide itself. I'm torn inside, or this devastated me and crushed and so on. Meta-analysis approaches to linguistic relativity. We looked at why the famous Orpheum thesis is so polarizing and continues to be polarizing. And one of the diagnoses we did is people had very different ideas of what language was. So if you took language as being kind of a Saussurian loan and then have a very determinative effect on you, then you tended to be a Orpheum. But if you thought of language being much more situated, individual, etc., then much less so. And if you're a universalist like Chomsky, forget it, because it's pan-human by definition. So we kind of, and we said actually they're focusing on different levels. In reality, if you think of language and other science systems consisting of all these languages, you get a much more balanced approach to linguistic relativity. We looked at pictorial metaphors in Greek street art with a PhD thesis by George Stampoulidis. We look at metaphoremes. Why metaphoremes? Because we're not looking at actually situated metaphors. I mean, like people say in particular context, but we're looking at like types, just like more themes. You know, my variable part of self is soaring. It could be my heart is soaring, my soul is soaring, my spirit is soaring, etc. And it doesn't have to be mine. So this is why it gives metaphoremes, and we compared, and we found, lo and behold, the closer the language to the culture, the more shared metaphoremes. Bulgarian was an outlier, at least in this group. We had no other Slavic languages, so maybe that was the reason. We thought it would be closer to the others. So not very surprisingly, the Finno-Ugric languages patterned together, but there were some regional similarities as well. So Finnish was in some way closer to Swedish and so. And yes, and what we're talking about now before the break is metaphors for stress and anxiety and therapy discourse by Helena Moscow. But again, what is metaphor? This is the promised Aristotelian definition that I'm sure that many of you have met, discussed, criticized. The application of an alien name by transference, either from genus to species, from species to genus, species to species, or by analogy. Aristotle's first example, or here stands my ship. Well, that's kind of a generalization. Right? So this is why the general standing is used rather than the specific being anchored. 10,000 noble deeds Odysseus did. Well, that's a specialization. You didn't do exactly 10,000. You're narrowing down. But here, drawing off his life with the tireless bronze and the dawn of life is what most people nowadays would say concerning linguistic metaphors. On the one hand, there is some kind of similarity in the form of action that is being preferred of drawing and cutting someone's head off with a sword, or on the other hand, the dawn of life is much more general mapping, as the cognitive semanticists would say, from one domain to another. But it's also based on similarity. So the much debunked notion of similarity or resemblance in metaphor theory, if taken more creatively rather than literally, we think is still very productive, and it helps distinguish metaphor from metonymy. Pretty much like Jakobson thought. I'll come to that after the break. The justice is not a literal similarity, but is an experienced or even constructed similarity. Here's a meme. I picked it almost at random. It's a metaphor, and you find all kind of strange things. You may have noticed that the term metaphor has become a meme in itself. That is exploded to a dangerous degree as many other terms. So people call all kinds of things metaphor. Well, maybe it is, but you have to spell out where is the similarity, or where's the transference? A metaphor for what? X is Y, etc. Here's another thing that popped up in the search. It's a metaphor, the cigarette metaphor. Where does this come from? Which film? Yes. Have many of you seen it? That's the great thing about having a teenage daughter at the right age. So I went to see it with my daughter when she was 15, 16. It was a big hit some time ago. It was a very, very good film and a good book by John Green, The Fault in Our Stars. So this guy, both teenagers have cancer, and he puts on coming out. She kind of likes it, and then they go out of the therapy session, and he puts a cigarette in his mouth. He said, "You destroyed everything." Said, but wait. He said something like this. I didn't quote it. It's a metaphor. See, you put the killing thing between your teeth, but you don't give it the power to do its killing. So he never lights it. It's a metaphor. Yes. If you're not very clear in what you mean by metaphor, yes. And it becomes funny in the film. He's nervous when he's traveling by plane and puts puts a cigarette in his mouth, and the air hostess says, "Take that away, sir." He says, "It's a metaphor." Then take that metaphor away. So somebody tried to do a kind of metaphorical analysis. The fault in our stars. Metaphor is battling cancer. It's having a lit cigarette between your teeth. How you, the person who holds it, has the thing that can kill you, but you don't like to let destroy. See how they're trying to construct some kind of analysis. I think it doesn't hold so great. It was more better as a rhetorical term. It's a metaphor when you start doing the analogy or the math. So my point with this is, of course, we can use metaphor in this extended sense for rhetorical purposes, but especially as semioticians or linguists, etc., we want to be a bit more precise. Even more so if you want to have models, and we have to have studies with operationalizations and so on. And it's not just everyday people; it's also the specialists. This is something that Dia will be talking about a bit this afternoon. We're talking about the debate in current metaphor theory about deliberate metaphors and non-deliberate, the role of consciousness or unconsciousness. So the famous book Metaphors We Live By was promoting a very unconscious bodily notion of metaphor beyond expression. Metaphors we just live by. A visual metaphor closer to the theme of this conference. Are any of you working with the deliberate metaphor theory? Not really, right? And I'm not surprised why, because it comes from linguistics, and this is a semiotic summer school. So see what our goals with cognitive semiotics kind of to bring cross-fertilized ideas from both sides. And Raymond Gibbs, cognitive scientist, wrote this book 5 years ago, Conceptual Metaphors in Human Life, and he called it Metaphor Wars. Not very creative metaphor. Science debate is war. Here's something to make it a bit more visual and pictorial. There's quite a war between the STEAM camp and part of the war, as again I think Dee will be mentioning, is not empirical. Who has the facts right? Much of it is conceptual. What do we mean by metaphor? Is it a cross-domain mapping in our bodies? As I said, technology is something to be. So here, what we did is propose, first of all, a set of criteria that modern theories of metaphor, irrespective of approach, irrespective of domain, should be able to abide by. And most people have been nodding on these. So this is kind of, let's have a benchmark on which we can kind of agree to compare our metaphor theories on. They should deal with both communication and cognition, right? So metaphors is both about thinking, experiencing, but also about communicating. Explain maybe some universal aspects or tendencies and culture-specific ones. Stable structures and contextual processes. Remember the dialectics we talked much about before. Not general enough to apply not only to language, but also to other science systems. This is what we've tried a lot, but may have gone a bit too far in proposing definitions that tone down the differences between language and pictures. And iterative theoretical definitions. And this is what we've been emphasizing a lot, that we have to be pretty clear with our definitions if we're going to go out and do specific empirical studies. Here is something that we took from a philosophy of science, a textbook by Watt and Van den Berg, and that I found very, very useful. So you can apply it not just to metaphor, the phenomena in the world are vague and often hard to define, like metaphor. What we do is we provide theoretical constructs, and the better these theoretical constructs overlap to the phenomena themselves, the better the construct validity of the theory. And then we go a step more and provide operational definitions to be able to identify the metaphors. And we have to identify, we're going to count them. And many people want to do kind of quantitative analysis, comparisons between metaphors in this genre, or this culture, and this culture. And here we have translation validity. Translation, not in the linguistic sense of translation, but somebody pointed out maybe using it metaphorically, the term translation, to provide operationalizations. So let me now before the break, finish with an application of the motivation and sedimentation model, and this idea of going from the universal but vague phenomenon of metaphor, narrowing it down first with a theoretical definition, and then operationalizing it enough to be able to identify and count metaphors in discourse. Just remember that maybe this is not the right way to put some of these slides, but just that for metaphor, just for everything we have this processes of motivation, sedimentation, and second motivation, or double motivation for both the universal and from the culture specific. And here are some 5 famous metaphor scholars. I won't do a quiz on who is who, and I guess you would recognize mostly the gentleman at the bottom, and I suppose the lady at the top. The ladies in the middle are less familiar. Cornelia Miller has been working a lot on talking about metaphorizing, right? Metaphor as or metaphoricity, a dynamic form of meaning. Maybe in your workshop today also on the enactive approach, that this is connected, that more process, more in action. And I think this is great, but notice with this 3-level approach, you can kind of synthesize this. These are Cameron and Damon were the ones who kind of established the term metaphory, combining specific lexical-grammatical with specific conceptual context, specific effective value, kind of freezing it to some degree, just like morpheme. And we have here pan-human processes of subjectivity, like cross-domain mappings, image schemas, which motivate but not constitute metaphor. And this is our major difference. We offer a hand to conceptual metaphor theory by saying, yes, there are such things that you're talking about, but these are not metaphors per se. These are only the motivations for metaphors that appear on the higher 2 levels, as usage events up here and as structures here. So the definition we came up at that time, I'll give a slightly updated and simplified definition after the break, is the use of positive composite sign in a given semiotic system or a combination of systems. It doesn't have to be only in pictures and languages, to be in both, hence it becomes polysemiotic, what other people would call multimodal. It leads to different potential interpretations, implying a degree of tension. So you have to find some different interpretations of whatever you're saying. So this is a cigarette. This is also something else. Now, some form of iconic relationship. And I'm sure we're going to discuss it. What kind of iconic relationship? And here we are broadly in the Persian tradition. That metaphor is a kind of iconic sign. It's just it's not the iconicity is hard to pin down if you're looking at specific pre-existing properties. One interpretation is more relevant in the communicative context, is an understood through comparison with the less relevant interpretation, giving you this directionality of the transfer. So here is a study that we published last year, and the journal Metaphor and Symbol. It's a kind of bastion for conceptual metaphor theory. So we were quite surprised that they accepted us, even though they were generally critical of most CMT approaches. The title comes from Søren Kierkegaard on anxiety or angst. It's the dizziness of freedom, which occurs when the spirit repulses the synthesis, and freedom then gazes down into its own possibility, grasping at the penitence to sustain itself, and dizziness, freedom succumbs. I guess one of the classical texts of early existentialism that influenced Sartre and many others afterwards. Dizziness of freedom, existential freedom,